Okay, her title is Maritime Power Politics in the Indo-Pacific, the Rediscovery of South Pacific Islands in the 21st Century. And Zhixin is a PhD candidate at UWA researching maritime power politics and the rediscovery of islands in the Indo-Pacific region. Her research focus is on how the two regional architectures, China's Belt and Road Initiative and the Indo-Pacific Partnerships, map onto each other and increase visibility of ports and islands in the global outlook. So we welcome you today, Zhixin, and it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dorinda. But before my presentation, I have to say that COVID and the lockdown in the past few months has given me some new ways of thinking. And now I have been working on reframing my project. And this presentation is partly based on my research proposal, and I'm also adding some new ideas. And my project title is reframed as China's Belt and Road in the Pacific, the rediscovery of South Pacific Islands in the 21st century. And this background picture is a 5-star resort in Fiji. And that's probably our very first imagination of South Pacific, the beautiful beach and the romanticized islands. But this area has become a theater of competition in the 21st century. And it is valued by being the checkpoints in the sea lines of communication and its abundant natural resources and a huge infrastructure deficit. And it is seen as the buffer zone for the US, the backyard of Australia. And China is also approaching this area by establishing new blue partnerships. And what this map doesn't show is Japan is also stepping up its investment and aid in this area. And South Pacific in recent years has become much more visible in international community because of the contestation between two regional architectures, China's Belt and Road Initiative and the Indo-Pacific partnerships among the US, Australia, India, and Japan. And so several strong powers are competing for influence in this region. And my project is focusing on China's Belt and Road Initiative in the Pacific. And this map is a very simple representation of BRI geography with 6 overland corridors and 3 sea lines. And you may have heard of the overland corridors from the Australian media or international media. And part of the story was also presented in the previous seminars. But I'm looking into the blue economic passage of China, Oceania, and South Pacific. Chinese government proposed 3 blue economic passages in 2017, themed around sharing a blue space and developing the blue economy. And it's trying to promote green development, ocean-based prosperity, maritime security, innovative growth, and collaborative governance. And I'm looking into the transformation of political geographies in infrastructures in the Pacific funded by China's BRI. But if we look into the very details, South Pacific, this area is actually outside of the historical narrative of Maritime Silk Road, which connects East Asia to the Indian Ocean. Then the question comes, how is this area folded into the 21st Maritime Silk Road architecture? Are there any new forms of power formulated? If so, how? To begin answering those questions, as part of my project, I'm analyzing the existing discourses of China-Pacific relations in BRI. And a lot of debate and discussion highlights the different components of trade, cooperation, aid, investment in different sectors, like ports, schools, hospitals, water facility, electricity, and fishery, agriculture, and ICTs. All these all these projects have been understood as China's geoeconomic strategy for the Pacific. And in China, the language has been framed around regional connectivity, prosperity, and shared future, and etc. Whereas the West reads these through the lens of geopolitics. And this is largely driven by the anxiety or unpreparedness of China's rise and its influence and its increasing influence in a region of strategic value to those other powers like the US, Australia, India, and Japan. And China's engagement in this area has been regarded with geopolitical aims, such as reducing Taiwan's international space, gaining access to resources, and promoting China's diplomatic and strategic priorities, and thus increases challenges in this free and open environment and preserving national interest. And that, in fact, has led to the construction of Indo-Pacific networks as a competing regional architecture and geopolitical response to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And this map is the US version of Indo-Pacific, which is expanded from the previous regional architecture of Asia-Pacific. And in this design, India is taken in as a counterweight to China's rise. But India's design of Indo-Pacific kind of expands its influence to, from the traditional Indian Ocean to the Pacific. And Japan's imagination is like this. But however different the networks are, South Pacific is always mapped within their scope. To conceptualize these existing debates and framings, I'm arguing that they are largely based on the topographical understanding of space and the implications of power. In the vast literature emerged on BRI, those maps are often part of illustrations of academic discourse, and they simply reduce regional architectures to several lines or scopes, and they speak to the topological construction of power and space, seeing power as a projection and representation in a mappable geography. But the reality of power relations is much more complicated than this kind of flattened constructed effects on those maps. And this kind of topological thinking of space has led to the recurring debates around geoeconomics and geopolitics, on great power rivalry, on how different powers should respond or negotiate or compete with each other. What I'm trying to do is to break that up and then shift some of the focus to the topological reading of space and power. So what is topological power? And to answer that, we need to understand two different terms: political topography and political topology. And political topography sees power as projected on a physical surface, and it spatializes how and where power operates, whereas political topology focuses on how relations make up and constantly reconstitute space. And that space is not mappable in topographical sense or in metrics of size, distance, or length. So to my understanding, topography emphasizes the power projection, means like the radiation or extension of power from a location to others, whereas topology focuses more on spatiality, which is made up with different relationships. And these two sets of spatial thinking define power's reach differently. Topographically, reach is flat, mappable, and extensive, and more about the distance. And that means the greater space where power is extended over, the greater it is. But the influence will likely diminish when power's reach is extended, while the topological reach is rather intensive, more about presence than distance. the presence is continuous and at the same time transformed in ways that enable quieter, more muted forms of power to exercise. And John Allen's topological thinking draws our attention to the notion of power on the quiet. And by power on the quiet, he gives us several examples like manipulation that conceals intent, inducements, too great not to want, enticement, and seduction. And those quieter forms of power are exercised alongside and sometimes in place of more blunt forms of power, such as domination, coercion, and constraint. So my reading of these two is, if topographical spatial thinking frames power and space in linear and flattened networks, then topology provides a new spatial frame where the topographical space is reconfigured. And that process has altered many of the ways in which power is exercised. And then new forms of power, which are quieter, come to the fore. So basically, topology helps us to better capture that power dynamics, the cross-region and cross-sector connectivity. And I'm also using topology as an analytical framework to find answers to my research question: are there any new forms of power formulated by BRI? And if so, how are they mobilized in this region? And to do that, I'm looking into the cross-region and cross-sector infrastructure projects. And here I'm taking an example of Guangdong province. And sister city partnerships have been established between cities in Guangdong province and the Pacific within the Blue Economic Passage of BRI. And Guangdong province is one of the pioneering area of China's reform and opening up, and now it's benefiting from its global network of trade and cooperation, and more importantly, benefiting from its innovative and high-tech industry. And within these partnerships, cross-region and cross-sector connectivity is promoted through new digital infrastructures. And to my opinion, that's China's new forms of power. For instance, this report titled South Pacific Island Countries ushering in a digital future with an extended friendship of Maritime Silk Road. It came out after the 2018 APEC summit, and it is reported that several high-tech companies from Guangdong province are starting cooperation with the region, like the Guangzhou-based Yihang UAV, and it is working with other Chinese UAV companies to tackle issues in logistics, distribution, environmental protection, resource exploration, and safety surveillance in the Pacific. And another example is iFlyTech. It is also looking forward to growing the local telecommunication and AI industries in the Pacific. This kind of digital connectivity that China is pushing forward also challenges the perception of infrastructure, which is largely understood by political scientists as hardware, like railways, bridges, ports, airports, and etc. And such physical hardware has been cited as evidence of China's geopolitical ambition. But in the last 2 years, we've seen the digital infrastructures such as ICTs coming into the debate. I'm sure that you have heard of the controversies around Huawei, around 5G construction, but more recently, China adopts the idea of new infrastructure. And Wu Hao, the head of the Department of High-Tech Industry of the Chinese National Development and Reform Commission, said new infrastructure is led by new development concepts driven by technological innovation and information networks, so as to meet the demands of high-quality development. And the idea of new infrastructure includes 3 aspects. information-based infrastructure like 5G, the Internet of Things, and converged infrastructure supported by the application of internet, big data, and AI, such as smart transportation, smart energy infrastructures, and innovative structure that supports scientific research, technology development, and product development. And I think by leading the construction of new infrastructure, China is formulating its new fund reach of power, and that opens new spaces for regional connectivity. Next, if we turn into the more urgent COVID issue, the Pacific is not the hardest hit area, but the concern is the countries are in huge deficit of hospitals, medical equipment, facilities, testing capabilities, and also human resources. And they are highly dependent on foreign aid in the combat of COVID. And another consequence of COVID is the huge loss in tourism. Without foreign aid, without the tourism generated revenue, it's going to be really, really hard for small islands to survive this crisis. So as a consequence, this situation means COVID can be another potential form of power for China, say medical agreements, collaborations between different medical centers, contact tracing apps and technology and etc. And I think in the near future, China is going to promote its Health Silk Road projects and shift part of its focus into the more human and softer infrastructure in public health and medical care. So what I'm trying to do is to examine China's new forms of power in BRI, and one of them can potentially be COVID. And last bit is about my methodology. My research is divided into two steps. The first one involves critical discourse analysis about policy papers from China and Pacific since 2013, and annual reports from multilateral forums and platforms, speeches and interviews of high-profile government or officials, as well as the narratives and discourses formed by institutes, think tanks, publications, academic researchers, media coverage, and etc. And the second step involves my Fiji-based fieldwork, which is the interviews with researchers and scholars in the University of South Pacific, and also representative or key staff in other international or intergovernmental agencies based in Fiji. And the University of South Pacific is particularly helpful to my project because it is jointly owned by the governments of 12 Pacific Island countries. And these intergovernmental structure and its fundamental connections within the Pacific and with the international community help us understand the Pacific Island countries as a collective, the South Pacific region as a whole. And several other intergovernmental and international agencies have also established their offices in Fiji, such as the Pacific Island Forum and UNDP. And these agencies are committed to promoting cooperation and connections in regional and international contexts. And I'm hoping to get some empirical data from the interviews. By constructing a topological reading of BRI, I hope to have a better understanding of China-Pacific relations and to provide a new analytical framework that takes regional architecture as a spatial formation of power based on my empirical data collected in fieldwork. And finally, then these new ideas are still under development, so I'm looking forward to your feedback and suggestions.